All right, good evening, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the council meeting of May 7th, 2018. Madam Clerk, have we met all the noticing requirements for this meeting?
Yes, Mayor.
And please call the roll.
Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Ms. Howard?
Here.
Mr. Liverman?
Here.
Ms. Crumiller?
Here.
Mr. Quinn? Here. Ms. Fraga?
Here.
Mayor Lampert?
Here. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we are going to start tonight's meeting with announcements. And Mr. Shield, are you ready for yours? Or should we start with council announcements? You ready? Okay. First announcement will come from Mr. Shield on our affordable housing compliance schedule.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to just review the timeline. As council is aware, we've been through litigation concerning our affordable housing obligations. And we have a timeline now to get us to our compliance hearing, which would be in July of 2018. Beginning now, we're now in the phase of preparing our draft housing element and fair share plan, along with the ordinances, regulations, spending plan, and affirmative marketing plan. On the 17th of this month, we will have the first time in which we'll be able to preview to the public for the first time the sites we are considering for the affordable housing plan. They will include both inclusionary zoning sites and those sites that will be municipally sponsored, 100% affordable sites. At that meeting, we will go through those sites, identify the sites, identify the number of units in the site. We will later have a full hearing on the actual fair share plan on March 7th, June 7th, at the planning board, where they will hear and adopt the fair share housing plan. That will then come back to council June 11th, where council will endorse the plan. We will then submit that plan to the court June 22nd for a hearing with the court on July 24th. Once the court approves our plan, that plan will come back to council to authorize any zoning ordinances that need to be passed, along with any resolutions and so forth that would need to be passed. That will be completed in August of this year. Any questions on the timeline?
Any questions from council on the timeline? Okay, great. We'll continue with announcements then. Start with my right, Mr. Cohen,
I do not have any announcements today.
Ms. Howard, Ms. Liverman.
Yeah, I think my mic's off. Hello, testing. Testing, 1, 2. I don't think they're
The
on.
light's on, but
I think-
hello.
Testing, 1, 2. Testing. Can you guys hear us? No? No, I didn't think they were. Should I?
Testing. No.
Testing,
These are not
testing.
working.
Testing, testing. What am I responding?
Testing.
Testing.
Hello.
Testing. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. No, I'm too loud. I just want to say, I don't know if the mayor is going to mention it, but the mayor's task force on teen stress and mental health, on May 30th, we're going to have a forum, and it's going to be entitled Minding Your Mind, about the emotional, minding your mind, about the emotional well-being, about your emotional well-being. And this came about in regard to the stress level that we felt that the teens in the Princeton area, I guess not just Princeton area, but the state of New Jersey and the United States in total, are under so much stress. and we're going to be discussing various items that we can help out. So I'm just mentioning on May 30th. Is it going to be here? I'm not exactly sure if it's going to be here or Monument Hall, but I'll find out. Thank you.
Ms. Carmelo? Mr. Quinn?
Yes, two announcements, Mayor. The Civil Rights Commission will present a Know Your Rights workshop on landlord-tenant rights. That'll be Wednesday evening at 7 in the clubhouse at Princeton Community Village. The Beta Bike Lane Princeton will be May 19 through 29 on Wiggins and Hamilton. So we're creating 2 bike lanes that will run from the back driveway of the library, also known as Sylvia Beach Way, down to Walnut Lane. And one of the many wonderful things about this project, which will bike lanes benefit not only cyclists, but they benefit pedestrians, since bikes don't have to be on the sidewalk, and they benefit drivers, since drivers know where cyclists will be. But one of the many wonderful things about this is that while it's been supported by the engineer, by the municipal engineer's office and the police department and the Complete Streets Committee and Public Works, it's going to be largely a volunteer installation. And as such, we are going to need volunteers. And so there's a sign-up form on the municipal website to volunteer, either Friday from 3 to dusk or Saturday morning, getting this set up. So I'd like to issue a challenge to my colleagues on council to each take at least 1 2-hour stretch, either Friday evening or on Saturday morning. And we expect, while we've never done anything like this before, we hope that the bike lanes will be operational sometime on Saturday, and we'll have some sort of ceremony on Sunday. So please, council members, sign up on the municipal website.
What would we be doing?
We will be using temporary materials to black out the center lines. We're going to go block by block with the support of the PD. We're going to be blacking out the center lines, restriping the center lines, and then Friday's work will be blacking out parking spaces. So anyone who's ever wanted to get rid of parking spaces in Princeton, now's your chance. We'll be blacking out parking spaces on Friday evening, and then on Saturday, black out the center line, reinstall a new center line, and install the bike lanes with temporary materials. And then there'll be some lane beautification projects that will go on after that. So please join us, council members and mayor. You've been challenged.
Ms. Fraga? Okay. I just have a couple announcements. The first is just a follow-up to Mr. Shields' report. There's an updated FAQ on affordable housing on the town's website, princetonnj.gov. And Councilwoman Krummeler and I submitted a letter to the editor, that will hopefully run in the papers this week, helping to explain what's happening right now with the affordable housing process. I don't know if anybody's announced that the bike rodeo, the annual bike rodeo, is going to be on Saturday, May 19th here in the parking lot. And that's a great event. If you have kids, they'll help adjust your bike and adjust the helmet, teach them rules of the road. And then this makes me a little nervous to announce this one, but if anybody has kids in Little League, they've seen me throw out the first pitch. But I've been asked to throw out the first pitch at the Trenton Thunder game on June 30th. So it's going to be Princeton night, and there's discounted tickets for Princeton. So it should be fun. So and I promise it'll be entertaining, at least in the beginning. So there'll be more information about that coming out. Are there any other staff announcements? Nope. Okay. Then we'll move on to our award of recognition for this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Councilwoman Howard.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'm going to turn to another mayor, Mayor Mildred Trotman, who I think this award was probably designed for, right? She's going to personify this award, which is recognition for contribution to our community. And we're so glad, Mayor Trotman, that you could join us tonight, that we get to give us a chance to honor you and all that you've done. You've served the community. You were more than a quarter century in the borough, including as our mayor. And then you've played a really critical role during consolidation. And because of your leadership and your shepherding of that process, you set us up for the successes we've achieved. And you really, your entire time in service was marked by a focus on consensus and fairness, and something that we continually try and emulate, that the wonderful leadership style that you inculcated in Princeton. So we're so fortunate, and really it is true that what we've achieved now is due in so much to what you bequeathed to us. So we're so honored to be able to recognize you, and we have a gift from the council. And if we can I come down, and we hope maybe if you feel comfortable saying a few words. Yes. Special token of Princeton for you that you'll see when you open that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah. Say it. Good.
Oh, well, I guess it doesn't make any difference how old you are. You still appreciate being appreciated. But I would like to say, not just to Heather, but to Mayor and Council, thank you so much for this recognition. I thought I'd never be able to say to Princeton residents how grateful I was that I got to serve and represent them for the 27 years that I did. And I got to tell you, when I was first asked, I thought, oh, I am not a politician. I don't like going door to door. I don't like shaking hands. I'd never make it. But I have to tell you, the longer I went door to door, that was when I could walk, the more I did enjoy shaking hands and talking to people and getting to hear their ideas and the way maybe they thought Princeton would should be run more smoothly, or whatever they had to offer. And then to be elected, to get the opportunity to try to have some of those things come true, it was just great. I never thought I'd hang in there that long, but I did. And I must say, thanks. So much gratitude go to Princeton residents, because had it not been for them and the faith they had in me, I would not have been around for those 27 years. So I do thank you, Mayor and Council. I thank the residents of this community for that long journey. I am truly, truly grateful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mildred. I just wanted to add my 2 cents too. It's just like you are one of those people who have really inspired me too, and your leadership style, where you never rushed into judgment and you always listen to everybody, and you have a wisdom about you too that I just really respect, and especially now being in this position, you respect even more. So thank you for the example you set, and for all your years of service. We're a better community because of you. Thank you. Okay. So now we come to comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to anything that's not already on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, we'll close public comment and we'll move on to tonight's proclamation, which is May. You've done your duty. For proclaiming May 2018 as Walk and Bike to School Month, and this is a proclamation we do every year to make the town eligible for Safe Routes to Schools funding. And I also want to mention that May is Bike Month all around, not just for school children. And so, as you've heard from Mr. Quinn, there's a lot of activities this month, and it's also, we've been really blessed with some beautiful weather. So, encourage everybody to get out. And now we come to reports, and I will start again on my right with Mr. Cohen. Any reports?
I do not have a report tonight.
Okay. Ms. Howard? Mr. Limmerman? Mr. Krummeller? Mr. Quinn?
I do, actually, one report, and that's that the Environmental Commission met last week with the university's green team, led by university architect Ron McCoy. It was an opportunity to get updated on the goals of the university's upcoming sustainability plan, and one of the most significant outcomes of that meeting was that the university will be hosting a work session with some of the leaders with a working group of our climate action plan to sort of talk about shared values and goals and to offer advice where needed. And the university also will do a separate presentation to the Environmental Commission about their stormwater management plan. So again, it was a very fruitful, nice symbiosis there for us to learn what's going on across the street and to collaborate on our climate plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Fraga. Okay, I just have one set of reports. The Economic Development Committee met about a week and a half ago, and just some of the projects that that group is working on. The first is a sign ordinance, and this is something that Josh Zinder and the Prince and Merchants Association has put together some ideas, so they're going to be bringing that to HPC. For HPC's input, it's going to come back to economic development to take a look at, and then hopefully come to council. And this sign ordinance has to do with creating a little more flexibility for merchants in terms of the signs they can put together. And there was also a lot of interest in the Economic Development Committee for this idea of a parking bank. So funds that would for example, like if you're doing a change of use to a use that requires more parking, but you're not able to provide that parking, the system right now is that the business would have to go before the zoning board to get a variance. And almost always that variance is granted, but it takes several months and it's very expensive. So the lawyers make a lot of money, town doesn't get anything, and there's still the burden. And so the idea is instead of going through that process, you would have a fund where people could pay into the fund based on the extra parking that is theoretically being generated by that change of use. So the next step is there's a subcommittee of the Economic Development Group that's going to be looking at how to structure that fund, both recommendations about what it would be used for, and also what do you charge per parking spot. So that will be coming back to council when they've done some more work on that. And the final thing, we had a presentation by a group of Princeton University undergraduates from a group called the Princeton University Business Volunteers. And they had a lot of really great ideas. And one of them was to create essentially this club on campus of 8 students, so it'd be 2 from each grade, that would work on how to leverage both the business community, get students engaged, looking at students as a group of shoppers and diners, and so they're going to be setting up this program along with myself, and you see Kristen back there too, who's offered to be a part of it, and we'll be working with them throughout the year to get the student involvement. So that's another exciting project.
I wonder if you should talk briefly to the consultant about the parking bank. I guess it's along the.
We did, yeah.
Oh, you did?
I
Okay,
chatted
okay, I
initially,
should have
yeah.
assumed that.
Yeah, and I know that was one of the recommendations, and there's some other models we can look at for other towns. I think some of the data we want to be looking at is just right now how many variances are being granted by the zoning board. So we have an idea of the amount of funding that would come in, depending on how we set the rate, and also get ideas about how other towns are using that money. Are there any staff reports? No. Ms. Stockton?
We're planning to have the bike corral installed hopefully by the end of next week. So we'll do it as a soft launch, and then we'll look to get together a press release and maybe do a ribbon cutting or some sort of event out there. And that will be also followed up with the garage parking for bicycles.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, that's really exciting. I just wanted to add one more announcement where people might have seen last week that Governor Murphy signed a bill that would allow municipalities to set up a charitable fund for people to pay into that would help with a tax deduction. And there's still details of that being worked out at the state level. And so we are paying close attention to those developments. We're not in a position where we could act on anything yet, and I think we want to make sure, have some assurances that it'll be accepted by the IRS too. So we understand that's happened, and we're paying attention. We are in contact with the New Jersey League of Municipalities also, who and they're closely watching this issue because it affects everybody in our state.
Mayor, that just reminded me when you mentioned that enactment at the state level. Also recently enacted at the state level was an earned sick bill that many of us had supported, and we had, I think I'm seeing a lot of nodding, we're excited, and we had been in a position to be considering moving at the municipal level, and so glad to see this happening at the state level. And I did just wonder, Mark, I don't know if you've got anything from the league. I thought I saw that maybe municipalities, anyway, what is its impact on us? I know we had already adopted it for our employees. Does it change anything? I don't know if you looked at it, and if
I haven't gotten any guidance as of yet
Okay.
and what the changes would be from what we currently have.
so that may be something for us to track. I don't know whether it's more or less generous than what we had done, and if that changes, and there are some exemptions in it. So anyway, what that means for our personnel manual.
Okay. I think personnel can take a look. I thought I read that it does not apply to.
I think it doesn't apply, in which case, I'm glad we have our own, and we would want to maintain that, but we may want to align it
Double check.
if we think it's figured something out better than we have on, verification or something like that, right?
Right.
Jenny, you agree? Does that sound right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yes, I agree.
Personnel can take a look at that.
Yeah, thank you. Good.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the work session for this evening, parking meter and smart card replacement project update and schedule. So I'd like to welcome back Julie Dixon.
Okay, I think it's working. Thanks, Deanna. And I think we're going up on the screen. Perfecto. Yep, got it. That part I can do. I think. Yep, maybe. There we go. Ta-da. Okay, very good. It worked. So thank you again for having us. We're really excited. We're right at the 2-month mark. And what we wanted to do tonight was give everybody an update. We did have an opportunity to participate in the Public Works Commission meeting earlier today. So a few of you have already gotten a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be talking about here tonight. But what we really wanted to focus on is really where we are right now, what we've accomplished so far. And one of the first things, and I think we shared this when I first met all of you, was really to dig in really into the weeds and really find out the core of how the programs are operating today, and really looking at areas where we can, number one, improve efficiency, optimization, but really learn how the parking operation is running today. And we've had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time with your staff members, whether it be Dolores on the parking permit program or Bill over with the parking meter program. We've had the opportunity to reach out to several key stakeholders. We've met with the library. Today we had the opportunity to sit with the university. And it's really about bringing all of those building blocks together so that we really can build an optimized program. But one of the heaviest lift items that we've really been focused on for the last bit of weeks has been the vendor agreements. We had the opportunity when we started the project that the municipality had already engaged 2 key vendors as a result of the National Cooperative Purchasing Agreement. And so what we were able to do is really kind of carry the ball over the goal line. So, and really working with the municipal attorney to fine-tune all of the deliverables associated with that. I think that several of you were able to attend the open house that we had just a few weeks ago, where you were able to see the smart meter technology that we're looking at deploying throughout Princeton as well. And so what we're doing today is to kind of make you aware. We're going to talk a little bit about the technology, because during the next council meeting is when we anticipate the agreements will actually come on the consent calendar for both IPS for the parking meter technology, as well as passport parking. That'll provide both the mobile payment technology as well as the online automated permit management solution too, which we're going to talk about here tonight as well. And we'll also talk about some of the things to come. But one of the other key factors and one of the other key stakeholders that we've had a chance to engage is the court. We were able to sit down with your court administrator here, and she was also able to make a reference to us so that we were able to talk to the AOC, the administrative offices of the court, and really talk about how we can integrate the technology that we're acquiring so that we can really optimize our parking enforcement officers in the field. And the great thing is they've already provided us with all the documentation so that as we've been negotiating these vendor agreements, we've basically teed up all the vendors so that they know what the expectations are going to be to perform in Princeton. So let's just talk a little bit about some of the technology that you've seen. So during the open house, we demonstrated the IPS smart single space meter. This is just an example of what the housings can look like. In your particular case right now, we're actually completing an inventory of all of your actual parking hardware that you have in the field. In most cases, we're able to retrofit some of the existing housings. In some cases, you have a variety of different single-space parking meters out in the field. And in those cases, some of the housings actually have to be replaced, but that'll all be identified in the actual scope of work. But the nice part about this is wherever we can repurpose infrastructure, we do. You might find that the smart meters are actually very green in the fact that they rely on solar energy, they have rechargeable batteries, and everything that's done with them is communicated wirelessly. So being able to do remote programming and managing those parking meters is really optimized and efficient. And we're going to talk in a moment about some of the rate structure opportunities that you'll have with the parking meters. One of the important factors when we start to talk about the single-space parking meters is that we've actually identified some locations where we really want to try to minimize the infrastructure footprint. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but there are some longer stretches of road where you have some of your long-term parking locations. We're actually looking at taking the single-space parking meters out of those spots and actually putting in pay stations instead. So that with the combination of mobile payment along with pay stations, we actually think that that will really service your community overall. But again, the opportunity to upgrade your single space meters, especially in the core downtown. But one of the other things that we're doing is we're trying to look at locations for convenience. And as a result of that inventory study, we're looking at locations where we can make short-term parking very accessible and identifiable. One of the things that IPS can do is they can actually provide colored domes and colored housings. And in the case of short-term parking locations, we'd like to identify the block entrances and the block ends, like that buttress up against the corners, so that those could hopefully be the most accessible locations for short-term parking. The other opportunity that we have in the short-term parking locations is to also incorporate and pilot a parking sensor into the actual head. In this particular case, the reason why we would do that is to actually prevent people from feeding the meters. Maybe they want to stay much longer than the 30 or 20 minutes or whatever the time is. And so that's something that we're actually working with the vendor as an opportunity. But looking at the key locations where we can put those short-term parking meters is really the next step. Once we get the contract established, this is where we really talk about the inventory and the layout and working with traffic engineering and public works. The other piece of this that's really important is the yellow domes or the loading zone parking. One of the things that we're already starting to identify is the need to identify your commercial loading zones, and something that we anticipate is going to be something that's going to be a bit of a transition for Princeton is going to be this transition to active commercial loading. And in this particular case, this is something that we have to start to address through public outreach, which really comes in this next phase. We needed to get all the vendor agreements established, but right now you have a loading zone permit that we sell to many of our businesses or give to many of our businesses, and that's something that we anticipate is going to transition away. And one of the ways that we want to help manage and mitigate that is by identifying commercial loading zones. And in this particular case, one of the thoughts that we've had in taking the Nelson Nygaard report is being able to identify potentially free active commercial loading zone maybe before 11 a.m. And then after that, commercial loading is paid for with active commercial loading, and then potentially transitioning that into a paid parking space after like 2 or 3 o'clock. But those are all things that will come as a result of this. But what we're also doing right now is identifying the key locations where we can optimize on commercial loading and making sure that those are accessible locations that are conveniently available for our commercial loaders, because we know that we need that in a busy downtown like yours. So I mentioned the pay stations, and you might have seen this at the open house, and just like those single space parking meters, they're solar powered as well, and all of the same wireless communications and all of the conveniences that come along. The one thing that I want to highlight, and this is very similar to the Dinky Lot location, everything will be considered pay by plate. So your license plate will really become your permit number, and that's how we're looking to really manage parking moving forward when we're going to start to talk about mobile payment. And this is really about optimization of parking throughout all of Princeton. The visual indicators on the single space meters will have really bright lights on them, so the parking enforcement officers will be able to identify green or red, whether it's valid or invalid. And then in the other cases, anywhere we have permit parking or pay stations, it will all be managed and monitored by a license plate. So we already highlighted a couple of the spots, but there's a couple of streets again where, especially as you head down towards the Dinky Lot, some of the areas surrounding the university where we have long-term parking, we're looking to standardize those long-term parking zones so that the time limit is maybe just 12 hours across the board at all of those long-term locations, but also, again, to minimize the footprint of infrastructure. And we're actually going to be able to replace 365 single-space parking meters with 27 pay stations. So that's, again, that hopeful replacement of the footprint of the hardware that's out there. We're also already starting to tackle the Franklin lot. One of our next rounds of meetings that we have to take place is to actually start to talk to some of our permit holders. We know we need to go talk to the high school about how we're going to manage their permits moving forward. There's a potential where the high school students could buy permits in the Franklin lot for day use. We could also potentially use Franklin lot for evening use, et cetera. But that's really one of the next stages, is that we know we're going to monetize that particular location as a potential interim solution. So I want to mention passport parking. I already mentioned the fact that we have an opportunity to transition the permit program online, and you have a variety of different permits, whether it be garage parking permits, residential parking permits, your meter bagging program, the high school passes. We're looking to take that entire process online. And even if they come into the clerk's office, the intention is to actually have a computer terminal in the clerk's office so that those that may not have access to that type of equipment, they could actually make their requests for permits in the municipal hall if that's needed as well. But to be able to take that service online, you also have the opportunity to do your transactions via phone. So in those locations where we're putting in pay stations, it will also be signed to indicate that you can use the mobile application. And in this case, we're looking at doing something that's called white labeling. And this is not decided yet, but there have been some ideas of taking the Go Princeton moniker and branding that with the green P, as you can see, to help promote the parking mobility access and to help promote the program for the mobile payment. And so this is an opportunity to leverage that particular application and be able to take it to a whole nother level. And that's something that we've incorporated in terms of pricing in that program. During our meeting today, too, we talked about the opportunity to utilize the mobile payment application for merchant validation. And this is a nice feature that the vendor can actually work directly with your downtown merchants. They can opt in or opt out, but the fact is that they can actually offer, customized parking for reduced rates, whatever they want to do to their customers. But they'll actually work that out directly with the mobile payment vendor, as well as the opportunity to transition the parking cards and being able to do a buyback program. That's one of the ways that we're really hoping to incentivize the use of the app, as well as the opportunity to potentially opt into different incentives. I think during our last meeting we talked about during non-peak seasons being able to offer users free parking, $10 or free parking a month or whatever the case may be, so that maybe during the summer, if we want to bring residents downtown, it's another nice way to really provide that opportunity utilizing the mobile application. And that's one of the neat things about the white label in the program, is that you really have a whole another communications platform to promote mobility and alternatives for where we want them to park, and also potentially with all of the smart parking solution, being able to do demand rate models. Today when we were talking to the university, we talked about this whole time frame and the opportunity to identify game days and other special event days so that we can actually charge for both on and off street parking for a comparable rate. We think that that's really an optimized opportunity for the municipality. This is just some examples too of what you've seen for the white label or the private label, is what other agencies have done to be able to promote that opportunity of putting that information out there about mobility and accessibility. Now, one of the things that we've talked about too is when it talks about digital permitting, is that we want to try to provide a very easy, accessible platform for your users. And so there will be a major marketing and outreach campaign for this, because we are looking to try to optimize on that customer service and access. We don't want to require people to have to necessarily come to the municipal hall to have to deal with, the process. And to be able to take this process online and provide that convenience is definitely optimal, where people can download or upload their verification paperwork, and it's all customized specifically to the municipality. It's something that, working with your city staff, we've already had some webinars and introductions to the technology. And so once those contracts are approved, then we roll up our sleeves and really get into the business rules, the implementations process. Now, I want to highlight the fact, because you have such an extensive or comprehensive permitting program, it will likely take about a year where we'll fully go plate-based or digital-based, because there's still going to be people who've had permits or are transitioning from the permits that they just purchased. But the nice part is there's that leverage of that opportunity of where we can really move the ball along. But we also don't want to do it all at one time, because of the fact that we need this to be incremental. I think we talked a lot about that the last time I was here. If you try to do it all at once, I don't know that we can all basically carry that burden, and we want people to be able to just kind of naturally progress into this process. So now talking just a little bit about next steps. We've already gotten the request to take a peek at some comparable municipalities for the in lieu of fees, so we're already working on that. We got that request today. The outreach really starts after we get those contracts approved, because we really needed to know the technology that we're going to be working with, so that we can start to baseline the rules and the business operations, and then we can start going out to the public. Just like the example of the loading zone permits, being able to start to reach out to the Chamber of Commerce, your Merchants Association, and others. We know that things like that are definitely going to be a transition, and so we need to definitely hold some people's hands as we kind of work into that process. But more importantly, we need to know what the alternatives are, and that's something that we talked quite a bit with the Public Works Commission about today, is being able to identify where do we want these vehicles to park for the long term, and that's something that we're definitely working on right now. Identifying that that private label, whether it's going to be Go Princeton, Park Princeton, whatever the case may be, that's something that we'll finalize and be able to have some work sessions with the vendor to identify what's the best option. The actual installation work, right now I'm forecasting that we should be able to start installing equipment by late July, early August, is what I would anticipate. It's typically about 12 to 16 weeks from when contract is executed. I do believe that we'll be able to work with the vendor to try to expedite that delivery process. But our one hope really is that you want to roll out the smart parking and the mobile payment really simultaneous. And it's really an opportunity with that brand or that white label to be able to roll that all out together. I heard you mentioning signage and us, being able to help tackle the wayfinding to be able to promote those locations of where we want people to park. And the next time that you really see us, which will hopefully be in June, is us presenting to you the recommendations for improvements to the municipal code ordinances, as well as the financial modeling workbook, where we'll actually be able to do some revenue forecasting and make some recommendations on the different rate models that you'll be able to potentially utilize and be able to go through those exercises. We know that the municipal code will probably have to go through a couple of reads, but the hope is in June we'll bring those recommendations to all of you first and foremost. Also, staffing recommendations that'll all kind of culminate all at the same time. We have a lot of balls in the air, as you can see, and also staff has been exceptionally responsive. I do want to highlight that as well in terms of helping keeping this moving. And we're also looking at other alternative options, whether it be valet or potentially the use of some remote parking lots. We had a very productive meeting today with the university, and they gave us some really good ideas. And so we just got those today, so we need to take those and kind of digest them. And I'm thinking that when we come back to you, we might have some options for some remote employee parking locations too. So fingers crossed, that's our intention. And with that, that is our update. And I have any questions?
Mr. Crown?
So I have two questions. One is whether you've identified any spots where you're going to transition long-term parking to short-term parking or vice versa. And the second question is really a tangent, but the bike committee has talked some about converting abandoned meters to bike parking. You know, there are ways to do that where you can put an attachment on a meter pole and create bike parking. And is that something you have any experience with and can make recommendations for?
I'll start with the second question. So your traffic engineer has already highlighted the fact, because when we take out your single space parking meters, we were talking about repurposing those locations potentially with the poles, with maybe a sign on every other pole or something directing people, at least initially, because we're going to have a re-education process. But she'd already suggested the utilization of those poles also for bike parking. So being able to repurpose poles for that purpose is absolutely an option, and I think something that we'll be digging into. And then in regards to the long-term and the short-term parking, it kind of ties into even what I was showing you with the green-headed meters to show the locations where we want to introduce short-term parking. But I think the same goes with some of the periphery locations to the core of downtown. We've already been having the debate. You have some 5-hour parking locations, and we've been really talking about whether some of those might need to be 3-hour parking zones, whether or not some of them need to be extended. So we're right in that. When we're talking about the inventory piece of it, that's exactly what we're basically in the process of really finalizing and fine-tuning. So more soon.
Yeah, just thank you so much. Very nice presentation. Very well done. Have you noticed ever when you do these in towns, if there's a confusion that takes place with the residents in regard to meter parking and then the pay station? Because it seems to me like that would be kind of confusing if we don't have that now. And I know we're saying, and I mentioned it before about the whole marketing process and all this, but should we start educating like months before we even put these things out here?
So that's exactly when we talk about the public outreach component of it. Once, hopefully, if the contracts are approved, that's really when we start to roll that ball forward, is that whole outreach of kind of preparing people for what's to come and being able to do that. Even just the open house that we did was really that starting point to kind of give people a palette for it. Where you have your long-term parking today, there's actually a tremendous opportunity that I'm going to anticipate, if I had my crystal ball, that a good chunk of those users are actually going to skip right from the single space meter to the mobile payment utilization. Because your long-term parkers, for the folks that are parking there, it looks like there's businesses or maybe they work on campus, et cetera. So the people that are actually parking there, once they set up their online account, they literally press a button to start their parking session and press a button to end their parking session. So those are the types of conveniences that I think that you'll find that in the long term, it's actually better utilized in that regard. So it's actually a cost savings. We have to have the debate of how many pay stations do you actually put out there, because you can't wholly rely on everybody having the smartphone device, et cetera. So that's been part of the argument, or I shouldn't say argument, the debate, discussion of really where to put the pay stations, because you want them still to be accessible and visible, but you also don't want to overkill and put too many of them in. But we also know we're going from that transition of where I had a parking meter every single space. And so we need to have that judgment of also with geography, are people going to be walking up a hill and then back down a hill, things like that. And then there's also a public outreach campaign, and I'll make sure on my next visit to bring, there's these really cool marketing tools. It's a keychain that has a license plate on it. It's branded, you know, with the municipality's name. and on the back with a Sharpie marker, you write your license plate number on it. So it's one of those, yeah, it's like a kitschy little idea, but it's a way to really promote the opportunity and the experience. And, you know, anytime you can do outreach on a program like this, because as you all know, our public is very passionate about parking. So anytime that we can get ahead of it, it's usually a fairly smooth transition. So, yeah.
Ms. Carmiller?
This is about the loading zones. Have you, in your experience, had shorter term parking than 30 minutes? Because I'm thinking for the loading zones right now, I think that some people use them to go in and out of some of the stores. And I'm wondering if there's ever such thing as, say, 10-minute parking.
There is such a thing. I will tell you, it's very difficult to enforce. And a really good example right now is at the Wawa, where you have the single space meters in front of the Wawa. And we were there today, and I think I was the only person that actually paid, because I just can't afford to get a parking ticket in Princeton at this point. So would not look good. But the fact of the matter is that that's the reason why when you start to talk about the 30-minute zones and the opportunity to potentially reset the meters, there's a way to manage that resource so that you really are encouraging people to kind of get in and get out. And that's also with the placement of the locations, where we want to make sure that you have accessible locations. And that's another reason why we need to really audit and assess where the loading zones are as well.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm wondering, because I think that it seems to me that there's a need for even 5-minute parking. I know that's what I do. Like sometimes my husband brings me up. I mean, we both go up and then he sits there while I run in and get something. I don't, you know, and I think a lot of people do things like that, or they just run in and they park themselves and run in and just hope they don't get a ticket or get caught. And even though that's not really ideal, it works.
Sure.
And by putting 30-minute parking in, we're taking that away. And it seems like we might be losing something there, and I'm wondering if there's a way we can keep that convenience.
Sure, we put the option of 15 and 30-minute parking on there, so one of the options could be the beginning of the block is the 15-minute, and at the end of the block is the 30-minute. I mean, these are kind of the simplistic, you know, commonsensical ways that we can also tackle it, is that with the green meters, I'll just call them green meters, the time limit meters, you really can establish whichever threshold that you really want to have. The only reason why I suggest the 15-minute versus 5-minute is because it never fails when you're running into the dry cleaner and then suddenly there's an issue with my credit card or there's an issue with my whatever, and you just don't want to basically get people into that pickle. And honestly, the other thing I didn't really touch on when we start to talk about rate models, one of the other conveniences about the short-term parking, and the reason why I do suggest the use of the anti-feeding mechanisms with the sensor, is because that can also be truly cheap, really cost-affordable parking, so that you can basically make that so that it's really the most cost-effective parking. But there's catches with it, is that it truly is 15-minute, because otherwise then you're locked out and you can't feed the meter, you can't take other options. It's things like that there's ways to manage it and to mitigate it and still, again, provide that convenience. Because the truth is there's usually one or two bad apples that ruin the bunch for everybody, right? So that's the tools of being able to put those preventative mechanisms in to prevent that from happening.
But for the loading zones, aren't they usually bigger than one normal parking spot? And that's one of the things that makes them easy to pull in and out. And so are they marked differently? Do they have when you were talking about putting meters in, were you going to just have one meter for a larger loading zone spot?
So that's part of what we're assessing right now, is that we're looking at the locations and how large the spaces need to be, because you're absolutely right. You typically have a tractor trailer truck affordability to be able to get the most into those spots. So what you typically try to do is you try to have 2 loading zones kind of back to back that are sized for a passenger vehicle type of vehicle, so that it's still big enough for a truck to pull in. And then it's really about the rules governing the optimization of that particular space and how we manage it, so that the business rules for those types of locations, again, should really cater to the large commercial vehicles, but also within the hours of operation that Princeton wants to dictate, so that if we really want those commercial trucks in here before 11 o'clock, which most commercial truck drivers, I have to imagine, would prefer to be out of here before the lunch hour. But I think that there's some things that, working with the Merchants Association, factors like that, that we can also try to make sure and tie that in. And that's where the outreach really comes into play, is that we have all of the information from the Nelson Nygaard report, and then taking kind of that raw map and then, you know, going to that group and really getting their feedback is going to be really integral.
Ms. Hart?
Yes, thanks. Julie, a question that I'm still having trouble wrapping my head around is, one thing that I always heard people liked about our smart card system was that you could put on more than you might use. You could sort of hedge your bets and then get some of it back, right? And so how would that work? Is that function here? Can you explain how that would work here? Yeah.
Sure. We actually just got a public comment today about that as well. And so basically it's all about business rules. And so it really is up to the municipality, so that if you want to allow people to initiate a session and then basically end the session when the session is over, utilizing the mobile application for that, it's basically the smart card just in virtual form, so that if the municipality decides that they want to allow people to initiate a session within the designated time limit, I always like to say, but then maybe they only stayed for 30 minutes versus the hour that they thought they were, they can always end the session. And if that's a business rule that the municipality wants to utilize, that's up to the municipality. So
By business rule, you mean sort of like that's our policy decision?
it's your policy,
right?
exactly right.
I definitely think we should have that policy.
So I think that's something we've heard from people, that they like. Well, but, okay, so what if it's not a smartphone? What if you're not doing a smartphone transaction?
So that's the one challenge. I'll have to verify with the meter technology vendors. I just have to look at it because it has to do with the PCI, or the payment card industry compliance rules, is that it's about when you're basically putting a transaction in escrow. So I just have to validate that. But
Can you, sorry, because of the air just came on, you have to be right in your mic and talk loudly.
Sorry
so people
about
can
that.
hear.
Usually people tell me to quiet down. So the one transition difference is when you're talking about the actual meter itself. With the credit card, it's about putting monies into escrow. But the other challenge, and I just want to put this out here, is today, if you drop a quarter in the meter, you don't get the quarter back.
Right.
And so the only benefit really goes to the smart card, is the whole kind of turn on, turn off piece. So your opportunity to provide a similar function really relies, you're just transitioning the smart card to the mobile. So it might be your easiest way of providing that convenience. And also it helps in terms of long-term costs for the municipality, because the less people that are dropping coin or credit cards, the less maintenance, the less wear and tear, the less collections. So it's actually a nice to have if you end up with that, turn it on, turn it off feature. It's actually a value add to the municipality for that matter. So.
Great, thank you.
Great. Ms. Quinn?
Thank you. Thanks for all your good work, ongoing good work, Julie. A question about what factors will go into recommendations about rate models. So our rates have been stable, haven't changed for 10 years or so. What, in addition to the fact that the rates haven't changed in 10 years, what factors will go into your recommendation about rates?
Sure. So the first thing is the Nelson Nygaard report is being able to take the recommendations that they put out there and published, and then looking at any additional comparable cities analysis. But the key is you can't do it all at once. The fact is that if it's been 10 years, it's been 10 years, but we have to come up with an incremental schedule anticipating that there would be some increase. It's not necessarily something that you can necessarily do all at one time, but being able to put you on a progressive plan for that. And then also the opportunity to potentially introduce demand rate models too. You have that opportunity in the garage as well as during special events, things like that. But that's really when we start to get into the modeling. The other opportunity that we also have, and we'll be able to present to you with the financial modeling workbook, is to show you that if you charge X, this is your rate of return here versus if you charge Y. So that will also put the tools into your hands so that you can also decide how progressive you want to be in that increase. But it's not very common for a municipality to be able to go out and double their rates overnight. It's usually something that they can put themselves onto a progressive increase schedule. And that's something that we'll definitely bring, and we'll give you some comparable analysis so that way you can see what others have done.
Have you worked with other municipalities or cities that haven't raised rates for a decade or so.
Yes, many. And I also just wanted to acknowledge my colleague Allison, who's in the audience. She's the one that really does all the heavy lifting. So I just have to acknowledge the fact that we wouldn't even have the contracts to where they are without Allison being the taskmaster as well. So, but I just really want to thank Allison for her efforts as well. So thank you for that.
Also, in your experience, do you have a rule of thumb of how high the price has to be to actually discourage people from parking? Are there numbers like that?
You know what it really is, it's really regionally based. And so because the other thing is if we go too high and then your merchants come over and say, gosh, it's free to park in this community, et cetera. So that's why there's no necessary, what I'll say, rule of thumb. You really have to take in so many factors to evaluate that starting point. And the one thing that, and again, I know this isn't San Francisco, but the SF Park project really showed is that they didn't do increases basically more than a minor percentage every time up or down, so that they really could try to gauge the impacts. And so that's the reason why I would say that you really can't do it all at the same time, and it has to be incremental because we also have to see what the effects are. So to that rule of thumb, what you really have to do is make those adjustments, and you really have to look at your inventory to see what the effects are. But we also know that we also have to look at, it's not just about rates. Where are we going to have the employees park? That's, one of the core factors that we really have to identify. A location that's convenient, safe, and accessible so that we can encourage the employees to kind of get out of the core, because that's really one of the magic answers. It's really about finding an alternative location so that we can increase the downtown inventory. So that's something that we're definitely vetting into, so that when we start to talk about increases, it really just has to be a palatable number, and really, again, encourage that whole balance of off-street versus on-street. And, there's definitely a bit of an algorithm that goes into it, but that's something that's very much custom to Princeton.
Ms.
Yes. Thank you for your report. In the report, I noticed the term space inventory, that there was space inventory done. And so my question is related to accessible parking. Whether that inventory included the number of spaces, accessible parking spaces, and where they're located. And also, I'm not sure if I understand correctly that individuals with disabled permit don't pay for parking. Is that correct?
In New Jersey, correct.
In New Jersey.
Right.
So is there a way, would we be monitoring that when on-street parking, individuals with the disabled parking using those spaces? But also, I'm interested in knowing where they're located and whether they're spread out throughout our community.
So we'll definitely, I can't give you the numbers right now, but in terms of that space inventory, looking at that from the accessibility, I know that the municipality has been looking at the curb access and all of those types of factors. So we'll definitely make sure, and we'll tackle that, and I'll bring that information back in our next report if that's okay. So we'll definitely come back with some information on that.
Great, thank you.
I'll just tag on to that to say, if there's historical data on the usage of those spaces, do we have way more than we need, or do we have some in places where we don't need them? And that will.
Got it.
I had a few questions. So the first question was, I know we have the multi-space meters already down by the Dinky station, and we're switching to a new technology, and I think a lot of us got a chance to play with it when it was here, and it seems to work really well. But can you, or maybe this is a question for Deanna, but was there like a reason to change from one system to the other?
I can touch on that,
Okay.
sure. One is the standardization, so that when you talk about the upkeep, the maintenance, the enforcement, it really simplifies the processes, and also the universities offered a buyback on those as well. So being able to leverage the equipment's actually already, I think, almost 4 years old. So being able to take advantage of the lifespan of that equipment, let the university buy it back, and then standardize the infrastructure that we're going to use. It also simplifies the user experience as well, so that the Princeton patrons become accustomed to that one interface and kind of that consistently throughout the municipality.
Okay, that makes sense. And just for like places like Bank Street where you can't fit the single space meters, will there be the multi-space kiosks for Bank Street. Have you guys looked at that?
I believe we've looked at Bank Street. I'm just looking at my colleague Allison, because she's the one that's really been in the nitty gritty on the meters. I will say that there are some streets where if there's only 1 or 2 parking spaces, those are the locations where you still utilize single space meters because it's not worth the investment of the, the larger kiosk. And so in terms of the optimization of that particular location, we are planning to bring back to you the actual layout too, so that you'll be able to see. We're just literally still pen to paper sketching that out. I think she's still looking at it, so
Okay.
we'll come back to you with an answer on that one.
Okay, and then the other spot to take a look at that I've just heard anecdotally is the McLean Street lot. I think we've issued more permits than there are spots, but there's still underutilization of the lot. And so it seems like it's an opportunity where there's a high parking demand, but for whatever reason,
Not used.
I think people maybe hold on to they pay to have the option
The
of,
luxury of parking, yes.
right, even though they don't use it. And let's see. Can you talk a little bit about how the garage rates are going to fit into the timing of this? And are those something that come after we do the meters, or do we try to do the pricing all together? And we haven't talked about the library validation, which was a big topic whenever it's brought up.
For sure. So when we come with the rate proposals, it will be comprehensive for both on and off street parking. Unfortunately, you can't operate in a silo when it comes to parking rates because one affects the other. And so it'll be very important that we look at it comprehensively and looking at that. And that's actually one of the reasons why we sat down with the library as well already, and we have more planned discussions coming soon. But being able to leverage the existing validation as well as some of their public outreach and things like that, there's some opportunities to potentially connect some information in the library to the garage too, which we were kind of excited about, being able to promote parking availability, or also time. So right now they're going to start promoting the bus schedule, the real-time bus availability in the library as well. There might be an opportunity to promote some of the parking information as well. So working with the library on that for sure.
Okay, great. And then just my final, it's not really a question, it's more a comment. I think that the graphics are so important. And Go Princeton is something that we've talked about, but hasn't really launched yet. And I just, looking at the graphics that were in the presentation, it seems overly convoluted and complicated to me. And it looks like there's a standard already, which is Park, whatever the name of the town is, or whatever the name of the town is, Park. And so I would just put in a plug for keeping it really simple and using whatever standard graphics there are, because it felt like there's too much verbiage in there, and I don't think it makes for a good logo. Personally,
you're not alone. I have to tell you this, but I want to highlight the fact, and this was discussed during today's meeting, is it really comes down to the municipality's objectives and goals. And there's several municipalities that are going after the go, so, or like mobile or go, so that it's really about that. We even talked about access for that matter, but Go Park City, Go Tucson, these are very prevalent ones and very consistent with the emblems, with the icons, with the bike, the bus, the P, that, or the pedestrian. That's actually fairly consistent. What's happening in many of those municipalities, that from the multimodal aspect, parking is typically the lead off. And so it really depends on the municipality's vision of what you're intending to use that viewpoint for. Absolutely, Park Princeton is really simple and clean. But I think the one thing I would just not be reticent to consider is what your global vision for the municipality is. And while the rest of the multimodal pieces maybe not be ready to launch, if you have a platform or a directive to go towards this could be one of the first factors that drives, no pun intended, but drives people to that initiative too. So I'm not partial to whichever one you all prefer, but I just want you to know that you're not alone in the fact that multimodal opportunity, this could be your linchpin in, or your first platform into getting people to utilize that multimodal, promotional opportunity too. So that without a doubt, when we go live with mobile payment, That is going to be on the front brand of everything and anything, so this could potentially be a launching pad for the municipality too. So just something to think about, but it can be whichever way you all want it.
But it would be, either way, we would still have the opportunity to put it into that app,
100%.
right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's really just about how you want it to be viewed, basically, how you want it to be presented publicly. It's
Right.
really up to your preferences, because the vendor now they'll do whatever you want in terms of whatever name you want to come up with, and then feeding it into whatever platform, absolutely not a problem.
And do we have a graphics firm that's helping us with this, or like what professional graphical services do we have as part of this?
So for the vendor that the contract will come to you next week, they'll actually do a proposed graphic for you. We'll end up having a bit of a work session with them, and then you'll tell them what you would like to see, and then they might even be able to bring you a couple of options to look at to see which one you like. I'll validate that with the vendor to make sure that's what we've done on other municipal projects with them as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'd recommend that maybe you consult with a small group, and I know like Tamara and Kristen are in the back, and they've been working on the Go Princeton campaign, but it seems like it'd be good to get some eyes on that.
Sure.
Yeah, Mr. Cohen?
I just wanted to comment that at Public Works, we talked about this a little bit, and, the upside of being able to really play up our Complete Streets commitment with the Go Princeton, where it could apply to directional signage and logoing of our bike facilities, for instance. I don't know if there's any will to rename the freebie, but, transit obviously can also be part of a Go Princeton campaign. So that's sort of, if we can get the graphic right so that you're happy with it, there's an upside to.
I was saying the exact same thing that you were saying today, and because I feel like you have to take two mental steps to figure out what it means, and I'd rather just say Park Princeton and maybe have a Go Princeton campaign that's apart from this, but have a marketing. I'd rather just focus on convenience. What's the easiest thing for the user, not what we want to market. So, I like the idea of having our little broccoli with Park, and then maybe have our broccoli with the bus, or, I don't know why we have to have a separate brand, but so I'm really opting toward thinking about the user and what's the easiest thing for the user.
Okay. Since it's a work session, I did want to open it up for if there's anybody who wants to comment. Who's here? Yeah, come on up, and if you please state your name and speak right into the mic.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Gale. I'm with the group that's in the process of purchasing the Peacock Inn. Hi, Deanna. I've had, limited success in trying to work out the parking needs of the Peacock Inn. As you know, it's challenged because of its location. It's just outside of the central business district. Don't really have the luxury of having a garage to park in that's really reasonably close to the inn. So we're struggling with how to find options to make it work, because we're going to be opening the restaurant again, hopefully at the end of this month. So we're going to have restaurant guests, lunch, dinner, Sunday brunch, tea time, those types of things. We're going to continue to have hotel guests. And of course we have employees. And now that the restaurant is going to be reopened, that number of employees is going to increase with that. So I realize that it's in a difficult position. We're right adjacent to a residential neighborhood. I know there's limited parking there. I know there are needs of the residents there to protect their privacy and what happens on their streets. But at the same time, we're trying to find balance and trying to find a way to work that out. So I would just appeal to you, Julie, to see what you can do to help us out. We're willing to work with you on solutions. We've had, like I said, limited success working with the Y, working with Deanna to find some solutions, but it's sort of a partial solution, I guess I'd say, that what we've gotten to so far. So I'm just looking for something a little more permanent that will meld well with, with the residential folks in mind and with our business needs in mind. So that was it. Thank you.
All right, thanks and congratulations.
Thank you.
Good evening, Kristen Applegate, and if you'll allow me to not have my university hat on tonight, I'd like to ask a question as a resident. So Kristen Applegate, 53 Governor's Lane. So I have a question about the 35-cent convenience fee, because I could not understand in the conversation that you had, because I am one of Heather's parkers. I have my smart card, and I always put more than I need so that I don't get one of those expensive parking tickets, and I go up and I get the money back. So,
And you feel really good about that. There's something, we feel like we got a deal,
yeah,
right?
you're absolutely right, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Heather. So I was confused in the answer. Will I now have to use a mobile app, and I'll be charged 35 cents more every time just to do that? I just somehow, that for the quick trip that I make in the morning to go get my coffee at Olive's or to run into Small World or, you know, whatever it is, to tack on 35 cents to what is a 25-cent parking fee, that doesn't make any sense to me. So I guess I'm just saying,
Right.
I hope that you all will work on that in the coming time between when the meters are put in place. I guess this is a rate question for your June conversation.
Can you respond? And then I think there's a good answer to that, but.
No, there is, and I apologize because I actually overlooked the transaction fee. I don't think I touched on it during today's conversation, so I do apologize for that, but it was on the slide. So with the mobile payment application, there is a transaction fee tied to a transaction, but you also have the opportunity to set up a wallet, very similar to like your toll pass, where you can basically, you know, put $25 on your account. You're charged one transaction fee for the wallet, basically, so that if you preload, kind of like when you do your smart card right now, you can preload your account with, let's just say, $20, and you get one transaction fee, versus the user that goes up and every time they press the app and create a new transaction with their, you know, information, then you would get charged a transaction every time. And that's why we're anticipating that for the longer term parkers, like the folks that are parking around, you know, the 12-hour parking and such, I would anticipate they'll establish a wallet. It's basically a variation of a permit for that matter, just a variance on a permit. They'll set up a wallet with their, you know, $20, and then they basically will enact that $20, and they will only have paid one transaction fee for it. But there is a transaction fee.
So it's the one time I put money on my wallet. So each time I do a short trip,
You'll
and want to
just
put
go
a
to your
little bit of
wallet.
extra on the meter, I won't get charged each time. It's just
Exactly.
when I fill my wallet.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. Eve Niedergang, 15 Forester Drive. I have a question about the Franklin lot. I know that there have been issues in the past about who should get to use that lot, especially people in the neighborhood. So I'm curious, is that going to be turned into parking? Could somebody speak a little bit about that?
I'll speak to that one because I think it's more of a political issue. So that is not going to remain a parking lot for the long term. And so I think whatever parking we put there, we need to be super clear that it's a temporary solution. So I mean, my own personal feeling is that it should just be for maybe for employee parking or for some group that is very specific, that we can be super clear with them that this is a 2-year thing they're buying into and then it goes away, as opposed to, I think, residents who are in a more permanent position potentially. So, but yeah, I mean, it's like it's sitting there right now, so it seems like we should use it, but it's not a permanent solution.
Hi, I'm Tamara Mateo, 91 Snowden Lane. I'm a little concerned about, we get now 10 minutes free at the end of a parking session for smart cards and stuff. And the 35-cent transaction fee I'm really concerned about because we have a struggling downtown right now and we have a lot of tourists. And so to tack that on, I'm worried about, and also not to have that flexibility of having the free parking, the 10 minutes. So I just didn't know if you had that capability or how that would work.
So when we come in with the rate modeling discussion in June, that'll definitely be something that we tackle. I will say that the 10-minute grace period is something that most municipalities are trying to eliminate for on-street parking because it becomes a situation typically of abuse where there's been agencies that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars as a result of even just that 10-minute window. But it's something that we'll definitely tackle when we start to talk about the rate modeling when we come back and propose what the rate structures would be.
So you could have flexibility with being able to give free, I know the
Cameron, do you
studies-
mind just coming closer to the
sorry.
mic?
I know the studies are that it's a kind of a lost leader kind of thing, but on the other hand, we're trying to get people to park, to come into town. And so I'm just trying to, what I want this parking thing is to be a good PR moment, and I don't want it to be a bad PR moment. And so that's why I'm just, so whatever you can do to look at that. That'd be
I
great.
think one of our priorities is to really focus on parking availability. And I think that that's probably been one of the things that we've heard the loudest from, I'll just say from the public, is that there's no parking available to them. And I think that that's been one of the challenges of that's where we start to talk about rate modeling and parking availability, is that when people come downtown to be able to dine or to be able to go shopping, is that they can't find convenient or accessible parking. And so that's one of the things when you start to talk about rate modeling. What I mentioned earlier is we know that there's a large influx of employees that park in the downtown core. And so I think that unfortunately, when people sometimes take advantage of what are intended to be, motivational or incentive-based programs, it ends up potentially being that some of your locals or your employees that are abusing those programs. So what you really have to do is identify where we want the employees to park to start off with, and then you really somewhat have to lock the parking operation down, and in some cases you have to adjust the rates in order to encourage them to park in those more remote locations. We have to retrain the behavior before you start looking at ways to maybe lessen, to lessen the pressure or lessen the blow for that matter. Because the whole intention of this program is to create transition, to create turnover so that we can have more customers come down and really vitalize, Princeton.
We just had a parking survey though, and we showed that we had excess parking because we have kind of a bad problem right now. When I was a retailer, we had 100% leased and we didn't have enough parking, and now we have too much parking available except during very small windows. So I want people to park, and so our problem is we need to get people to park down there. And so I need more incentives. I think the town needs more incentives than it does disincentives. So it's just,
I just want to comment also that I think one of the, at least for me personally, that grace period has been important because I often underestimate the amount of time it's going to take for me to do something. And it's really a blessing to not get a ticket if I go 5 minutes over or 10 minutes over what I thought it was going to take me. With the pay by phone app, you'll be able to add money to your meter without going back to the meter. So that essentially eliminates that need for that benefit of the grace period.
but the grace period was it's just a nice
No,
offer. to
I understand
community.
your comment. I just wanted to make that.
No, I agree. It will be easier not to try to get a ticket. Or we get a ticket. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I do just want to add too that the app adds a lot of flexibility. So one, it'll notify you so you can add money remotely. And it also, I think the merchants are really excited because the app gives them the ability to do validation, which we don't have right now. And that will be, I think, a really positive PR move that for merchants who are interested, they can give back a little bit to customers.
For both on and off-street parking, which that's a really new feature, which is nice.
I'm Bob Schwartz, 63 Grover Avenue, and reassured somewhat about the smart card issue. Sounds like we can approximate it. It's only maybe almost as good as the smart card we had. But in addition, it seems like the promise initially, at least when I went to some of the Nelson Nygaard presentations, was that we'd be reducing rates in some areas and increasing them in other areas, or maybe in certain times and increasing in other times. Net, we're going to be increasing gross revenue probably, right?
It's actually still, nothing has changed from the way Nelson Nygaard has promoted it. That's part of what we'll be bringing back in June is those recommendations. Is that there could absolutely be locations where it could stay the same, some could decrease, some could increase, so, but everything would be incremental for sure.
I think the goal from council with the finance part of it is that we want at a minimum to stay revenue neutral, because if we don't, we'll be increasing taxes. But I think that the goal of the pricing is to encourage behavior as opposed to looking at it as a revenue stream, which is essentially what the Nelson Nygaard consultants were advocating. So hopefully, I mean, there's a lot of pieces in the puzzle, but hopefully it all adds up in a way where it's essentially neutral.
Yeah, discounts are people love discounts. I was visiting my son in LA a few months ago, and he has contractors. He's a contractor for some people in Chinatown there, and they just put in these fancy meters that change the rate at lunchtime from $1 to $5 an hour, and those merchants were not happy.
Is there anybody else who'd like to make a comment? Nope. Okay, thank you. We'll see you again in June.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we come to resolutions. The first is 18167, resolution authorizing a professional services agreement with Shirley M. Bishop, PP LLC, to serve as the affordable housing consultant for 2018 in an amount not to exceed $60,000. Is there a motion?
I'll move it.
Moved by Ms. Kremler and seconded by Mr. Liverman. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 18168, resolution authorizing the amendment of an existing contract for professional services with Van Note Harvey Associates for professional engineering services related to the identification and reduction of extraneous flows in the sanitary sewer system in an amount not to exceed $71,500. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move it.
Moved by Ms. Kremler.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Liverman. Mr. Huff, did you want to toot your horn about this one? Briefly.
Very briefly. This is to increase our contract because we've hit a home run this winter. With all the snow and rain, as much as it's been a nuisance, from our standpoint with the sanitary sewer system, we have had some incredible metering results. We have added meters, we have increased our time, and we're currently in our spring program, which is going to go through the end of the month. So we got lucky. It happens, and we finally hit it's an engineer's dream in a way to finally hit something like this. One of the things that was asked at the agenda meeting is if in a couple of weeks, if we could come back in and give a presentation. Once we get all our data, yes, we will. I'll bring David Goldfarb along with me and bring your lunch, bring your dinner. We'll give you a couple hours on it. I mean, that's how much data we've gotten. It's just been a home run. So we will be back.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Next is 18169, resolution authorizing the purchase from Cherry Hill Winter Ford, a Ford maintenance vehicle in the amount of $37,684, and a Ford utility vehicle in the amount of $27,280 for the Recreation Department. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Ms. Fraga, seconded by Ms. Kremler. Any discussion? All in favor?
I just have a question. These are gas-powered exclusively vehicles. They're not hybrids or plug-ins, correct?
I believe that they are gas-powered. We're actually, as you're aware, going through a process of reviewing all of our vehicles to determine which vehicles we can move to alternate fuels.
Okay.
So you may see those probably not in this group of purchases for this year, but I'm assuming as soon as we get that information, we'll start.
Great. I know that the rec vehicles are old and need replacing. I'm just hoping that these will be the last gasoline-only vehicles that are added to our fleet.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. And next is 18170, resolution authorizing the purchase of an affordable unit, 134 Griggs Drive, in the amount of $128,398.27. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Krummeller, seconded by Mr. Liverman. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. And next we come to the consent agenda, which contains items of a routine nature passed by a single vote. Are there any items anybody would like removed from the consent agenda? Or if not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Quinn and seconded by Mr. Cohen. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and consent agenda passes. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Third.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
She always did it for the planning board.
What's that?
Mildred always moved to adjourn for planning board.